What's up? We're back, people. No,
we're back. You can't see my guns.
Oh my God. No audio. Yeah, we need more of a fisheye lens on that one.
Easy, buddy.
Yeah, man. Freaking audio, whatever. And you've changed nothing, and it's working.
Technology is going to technology me.
You should have just.
Yeah.
I was going to say you should have just taken credit for it. You're like, I did a ton of troubleshooting. I figured it out.
I'm telling you, 3 hours of work, and I finally got it to go. That's basically what happened.
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah. Actually, it was just I didn't get on the computer for 2 days, and now it decides to work. I do one test, it does fine. It did a solo episode, which is already out by the time this comes out.
Oh, okay.
It went out on Monday, so actually probably while we're talking, it's going to go out. But yeah, who knows?
Well, I haven't even watched yours yet. You know, I did mine. You did. I guess I'll have to just watch and see what you did.
Well, I did. I actually waited till after the Crown, the IBJJF Crown tournament, and I just did a really quick recap of like matches to watch, stuff you can skip through, the overall narrative. And nice. I tried to make it kind of quick just so people don't have to watch 6 hours of tournament.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good service.
Yeah. And it was, did you end up watching it yet?
No, dude. Not yet.
It was long.
Yeah. What day was it?
Yesterday. It was on Sunday.
Yeah, we were up late watching UFC, John Jones and
right.
That thing.
Yeah, it was it was a big fight weekend though, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because we had the John Jones, Stipe, Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler, UFC card.
That was crazy fight.
The Crown. There was a couple Abu Dhabi gi tournaments. Like, the Abu Dhabi World League or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
They had some really good matches over there. And then there was the spectacle, which is Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul. Did you watch that?
No.
How dare you?
Yeah.
You're such a purist.
No, I don't know, man. I have my own
wasn't your cup of tea?
No, I mean, I love Tyson, man. He back in, when I was in high school in the 80s, my brother and I were, we'd actually buy the pay-per-views and then be pissed after a 30-second execution, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, man. The guy's older than me. And props to him, man. He's still in phenomenal shape, but he's 58 years old.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, so it kind of went how I expected.
Yeah.
But I had this hope of, so there's a lot of video of him hitting mitts and stuff like that. And you're like, this dude looks like a terror.
That's right.
Scary. Right. Athletic still, really fast. You can see all the old signs, like stylistically, of what we know of Tyson, with the peekaboo style and all that.
Yeah.
And then, but I've seen this in jiu-jitsu. I've seen this in MMA.
I know what you're going to say.
I've seen this in boxing. When they get in the ring, that the pulling the trigger, that delay of the reaction time, of you're not just in that comfort zone of hitting mitts of pop, 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 where you can just kind of let loose.
You just hit the nail on the head. It's the reaction time too is huge, man. I mean, it just doesn't fire as quick. Plus, he's not fighting regularly. That whole, the more you're competing, the more comfortable and letting loose and all that when you actually go and hit the fight. Like you said, that applies to jiu-jitsu or whatever, any kind of combat sports.
Yeah. And we saw that.
Yep. Okay.
He looked like his feet were stuck in mud. that footwork that we're so used to and that we saw in the hitting mitts.
Yeah.
His balance was not great. Which he's always kind of sometimes thrown punches to the point of being a little off balance, but it was very noticeable. And then he just didn't have much forward, back, side to side movement. There would be glimpses of it where you'd see the like boom, boom.
Yep.
And then you'd be like, oh, there it is. And then it would back off.
Yeah.
And then Jake would like throw a couple punches and you'd see this delay in this slow reaction time. And we've seen it I remember when Andre Govao, it was a gi match, and I don't remember what tournament it was. This is years ago, 10 years ago. And even then we could see, maybe it was 7 to 10 years ago. You could see that, okay, the old lion is getting older, right? His reaction times, his offense was more delayed. They're hard as hell to beat, kind of like a Wagner, right? He's going to be extremely hard to beat. His defense is top of the food chain, but offense becomes more difficult. And as we've gotten older, we see it in ourselves that for us to have those kind of like scrambles and stuff like that becomes way more difficult.
Well, Andrew and I were talking about that on Saturday in general. After class, we're like, talking about watching these competitions and some of these kids coming up now that have done jiu-jitsu all their life. I mean, from toddlers almost, and have developed their nervous systems around it. Compared to, and if you watch the adult matches now, and then as you progress through the Masters level, Masters 1, Masters 2, Masters 3 even still looks not too dissimilar from the adults, but when you keep pushing it up, like Masters 5 and 6, if you put the matches side by side, you'll see a very stark difference in approach. And that has to do with what you're just talking about. The explosiveness, as we age, the first thing that goes is that fast twitch capability. But we do maintain isometric strength for a long time, the so-called old man strength. So you see these slower, kind of more methodical, positional type of matches, a lot less scrambly. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but in general, yeah.
I noticed that when I roll with Paul Nava, he's won Master Worlds multiple times. He's won No-Gi Worlds in his age bracket multiple times.
What age bracket is he?
I think he's Master 6.
Okay, so he's in mine.
Yeah, I think he's 57.
Yeah.
I think he's Master 6.
That is Master 6,
but he's won from Master 2, I think, all the way. He's won almost every year.
That's incredible.
He's got a lot of those Master Worlds and No-Gi Worlds and all that kind of stuff. He's got a lot of accolades. So I feel it with him is that isometric strength is every bit there, as much as when I go with the young guys, if not more, honestly. Sometimes when he gets his sleeve grips and he puts his shins like a bicep ride, it's like, I guess I'm not moving anymore. This is now, these are his arms. So I can definitely feel that. He actually scrambles really well for his age group. I'm sure you'll come visit at some point and be able to roll to him. It's pretty cool to see that age, someone that's actually still got some scrambles. He's a bigger guy too, a little bit bigger than us. I think he does medium heavy, so he's not giant or nothing. But yeah, so it is interesting to see that. But with that, a lot of people have started to claim that maybe the fix was in because they saw all of the hitting pads and stuff like that from Mike Tyson.
I see what you're saying.
And how good he looks, that when they saw him in the actual fight, that they were like, this is like two different people. What the hell is this?
I think,
go ahead. Yeah.
No, I don't think, I see where they're going. This was a fix. I doubt that seriously. I just think it was what it was. He showed up and hadn't been in,
Yeah.
and like you said, didn't put all that because again, you can hit pads. It's not the same as evading and like it is in a real fight, with the
and the penalty of getting hit isn't there when you hit pads.
Right.
And if you start opening up a little bit, I mean, Jake obviously is, say what you will about him, he's a boxer.
Yeah, for sure.
And he's got heavy hands.
Yep.
So, as that's another thing that goes quicker than other things is your chin. And let's say he takes a jab and it's like, oh, okay, I got to respect this punch here. So then hesitancy comes in even more, cautiousness and stuff like that. I think I totally admit, this could be the naive side of me because I'm a Mike Tyson fan. I like who he's become as a person a little bit.
Me too.
And I don't feel like he would do that.
No, I don't think that's in him. He's out there to
in his character. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it to me. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's interesting though.
So that's kind of what's swirling around the fight game right now. I wanted to actually touch base and just switch gears a little bit into a couple topics, and it's stuff we've always talked about, but I think it's our wheelhouse. Strength training tips for grapplers. Now, I will kind of run you through a couple things that, as I do, one of my resources is the Chris Wojcik Grappler's Diary. I love the stuff he puts out there, topics and stuff like that. Same with Chew Jiu-Jitsu and these other content creators. I do like to kind of glean topics off these guys. So I'm going to glean one off of the Grappler's Diary, which is strength training tips for grapplers from his experience. So I'll kind of go through them and I wonder what you kind of think about some of these. One is strength training is better than cardio training. This is for grapplers, right? So at least from his experience, and I feel like I probably tend to agree, and I'll give my 2 cents, then I want you to jump in, is if I'm going to do some sort of auxiliary training to our jiu-jitsu, I would do strength training over some sort of cardio base. Now, scientifically, that's where you're going to be able to jump in of if that's maybe a true statement of why. But I feel like I'm going to get my grappling cardio. I can't run a mile in under 6 minutes, but I can roll round after round after round. I can do some sprints and recover kind of quickly because that's kind of how our cardio is built for grappling. But if I'm going to have time to do auxiliary work, strength training, I think, is probably more beneficial. What say you? Disagree with me is fine. I don't
think it's not an either or. Here's the thing. So you're saying you'd have to choose one if you were to choose one over the other? Like if you said you could only do one. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Okay. Yes. We're not saying doing cardio is bad. Absolutely not. Okay. We know that Airdyne is a game changer when people want to do a ramp up for a tournament, let's say, and you're going to have that, not just sprinting cardio, but sprinting recovery. And when I say recovery, I don't mean recover over the next night. No. I mean recover in the next 15 seconds.
No, for sure.
That there's an absolute benefit. You should be doing that, but we're just kind of playing like a little, if you got to pick one.
Yeah. So, gosh, man, it's hard to fit in that little box here because I'll tell you, it depends on what your individual needs are. If you're, so let's say you're coming in to grappling from, and we have a couple folks in our academy like this, from a endurance sports base. Okay. Sure. You've been serving that master for a while. You have really good aerobic capacity, probably decent VO2 max, that type of thing. that type of person would benefit hugely from a strength training program over more cardio, for sure. But here's the danger in this. And they talked about this. Andrew and I, a couple years ago, went to the first, the FRS guys put on the very first internal strength model course down at the UFC Performance Institute. And they made a couple really good points. So, and I've had some recent offhanded conversations at guys at our gym here talking about, I'm going for my max lifts and stuff like that. If you're a power lifter and that's your sport, pushing that envelope is what you're supposed to do as far as your max lifts. Their point down at FRS, especially Dr. Spina's, was like, well, how much do you really need? How much strength, do you need a triple body weight deadlift? His point was no. He thought that a double body weight deadlift was plenty strong enough for that just general strength. Or you see where I'm getting at, where as you keep pushing that envelope and let's say you're not a power lifter and that's not your sport, the risk reward starts decreasing rapidly, because as you know, you're trying to do, like, let's say a max back squat. Anybody that's done that, and when you're doing a max, you're redlining your nervous system. It takes like a little shift of body weight, a little inattention, and you have this huge load on your back. I just think the risk of injury pushing that top PR type lifting, personal record type stuff, the juice isn't worth the squeeze when it relates to grappling, in my opinion. I'm not saying that strength for sure matters, but how much are we talking about? If you're competing against someone in your weight class, how much do you need? Now, if you have a significant deficit and that is a problem for you, let's say that, your lifts are, you're very deficient in them. Let's say you can barely do a body weight deadlift. Well, that's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. But you see what I'm getting at, and it depends on who you are in this. But so we have a couple guys that are just beastly strong at our gym, and they love doing the powerlifting thing because they're good at it. We all love doing things that we like and pushing that envelope. And I had a conversation with one of our younger guys, and he was like, I'm trying to push my bench press to get my max. And I'm like, why? I get it. And his answer was
that Jeff Hess?
No. No, I'd give him a real hard. No, it's another one of our. No, he's a good dude, and he had a perfectly fine answer. He goes, "Oh, I enjoy it." I'm like, okay, fair enough. But don't kid yourself, when you blow your shoulders, unless you see you're serving another master here.
Yeah.
So I would say, in your core lifts, if you want to develop some requisite benchmark, that's fine. Where you could do, let's say you can do a double body weight deadlift for 3 reps, some good squat numbers, things like that. I would say at that point, you should really focus on, I know I preach this over and over and over, is that kind of end range, odd angle strength training. Not only because you can get someone that is just training in what we call the sagittal plane, right? In other words, that kind of front plane that if you look at someone, they're slotted. They're very slotted into this, what we call the sagittal plane, where we're benching, we're squatting, we're deadlifting, but they're not working these odd angle things. They're not working these end range muscular contractions, where that's where we are in jiu-jitsu. Because I know some people that I've rolled with, I can right off the bat, here's a perfect example of this. Like, have you rolled with Matt Zarate?
Yeah.
Okay. Guy's maybe 155 pounds. He doesn't power lift or anything like that. He does a lot of yoga and stuff like that. The dude is crazy strong to roll with. And it's because he's training a lot of these in-range strengths. I don't think he could put up, I might be wrong, but I don't think he could put up a lot of very impressive numbers with weights. But that's not the point. The dude is a freaking...
That's like me. I can't lift weights for the life of me. Like
yeah,
if I
but
tried to deadlift, I don't know if I could do a lot more than my body weight.
but that's my point. And rolling with you is, especially, you clamp with your
It doesn't
leg.
translate as like the leg clamps feel super strong.
Yeah,
compared
and
to,
that's my point. And so that's the kind of stuff I've been doing now for myself, as an aging athlete is, gosh, man, I know I keep saying this, man, but really training in ways where you don't have artificial support mechanisms, like your back's not flat on a bench providing support. You're providing intrinsic support through your core, so to speak. I hate to use that word, but with your pushing and pulling, you're training these odd angles. I was doing some warm-ups. I taught class last Monday, and we were doing some of the FRS warm-ups there with the hips, and people were cramping like nobody's business, couldn't get their legs off the ground, and that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them that, I'm like, if you're having trouble with this, it's only a matter of time before you're going to hurt yourself. And plus it translates so well into your guard, in scrambles when you're at these weird positions, because that's where these guys that train sagittal plane all the time, dude, they're crazy strong and you can feel it, but you start cutting angles on them, it's harder for them to generate. Anyway, I think it depends, but I also think there's a lot of people that, the old quote is, fatigue makes cowards of us all, right? Where having that extra gas tank, and you see this in mixed martial arts all the time, there can be a stronger dude, but if a dude has a good gas tank and is a defensive guy, in that 4th and 5th round, they start piecing them up because the other dude's exhausted. So I don't know about that, man. I don't necessarily agree that. I think if you're very underpowered and you're coming from a background like that, I think you should I would focus on strength training. But if you're already pretty darn strong, I would start working outside of the sagittal plane, and I would build an aerobic base too.
Like maybe our CrossFit, I don't want to say athletes, but people that maybe they've been doing CrossFit for a few years. Yeah. They've got a pretty good base muscle wise. That might be the person that's like, okay, well, maybe some certain style of sprint or cardio actually might be a little bit better. You're probably carrying a little bit more muscle, so your cardio is not going to go as far in what we do.
Yeah, you can't serve two masters completely, right? Yeah. And you can try to be good at both. I would argue this is what I would argue. Have a good requisite strength where you can still move some weight. But also not to the expense of, you gassing after, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And working muscular endurance, man, is also super important. Isometric strength training would be really beneficial. Yeah, so there's a lot to that. I'm not saying he's wrong. It depends on what he needs.
Sure. And I can, like how he actually worded it was, strength training is better than cardio. It's not that cardio is bad, it's good. But if I had to pick one, I would always pick lifting plus hard BJJ training over cardio training when optimizing for performance.
Sure.
That was just his little quip. And it's interesting because you already touched on the second one, which was, he said, lift like a grappler, not a lifter.
So true.
Which is basically what you just said with the sagittal plane and that whole part of what you were saying.
Yeah.
And even number 3, which was focus on technique, is his third kind of point.
Technique with what?
There. He says, in the same way that you wouldn't rip a submission on a new white belt, don't rip weight that you can't handle just because you want to. Focus on doing exercises right, not competitively. This in turn will make you do them better competitively, which I feel like is a little bit of what you were saying there with controlled movements, off the sagittal plane, strengthening in those moments of, instead of here where I'm like really like I'm super strong, but I'm kind of like this, like, oh my gosh, how can I be strong here with my elbow coming in and
right.
Yeah.
And the other thing I like to harp on, I haven't proven this yet, it's just my own experience, that setting yourself up for with a functional trainer, like a cable machine where, let's say I'm pressing, kind of getting down in a tall kneeling position with your back to the cables and doing some pressing from there while you are stabilizing your own. You're not having a bench to press against. I mean, because that's how we roll. That's how when we wrap up with someone, we don't have our back isn't against the wall. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you're pushing, sure. if you can generate your own intrinsic stability through your body as opposed to have an artificial stability source, I'm not saying that's never appropriate, but in general, I bias my training to things where I have to actually stabilize the platform, so to speak, and the platform is my body instead of some kind of bench.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I remember when I first started jiu-jitsu, before I was going to Cascade in the first couple months there, there was a guy, he was like my main training partner because he was a little bit bigger than me. He's probably like 210. Well, I probably weighed more than him actually, but he was a top 100 ranked CrossFit athlete. Mm-hmm. And he was just starting jiu-jitsu. We just happened to start at the same time. Mm-hmm. His name was Keegan. And I remember to this day, even once I got my blue belt, I rolled with him. I was going to Cascade, but I still kept in contact. We cross-trained. Even then, I remember, obviously a CrossFitter of that caliber, an active competitor, they're in phenomenal shape.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember to this day when he would have like side control, he wouldn't even have great technique, but he could do this almost like a crunch, the amount of pressure he could put with just being in like sprawling and then crunching in. He could put so much chest to chest pressure on my diaphragm. Isn't even necessarily the right technique to do because he's like sprawling so I could get my knees in if I was more technical.
Still.
But the amount of pressure that he could do just with core strength was startling.
Yeah,
and then you ran me through some of these cable workouts before. And as I've gotten more ingrained with like stand-up and judo and stuff like that, I see an even larger benefit with those cable movements because, for example, in judo sense, and I hate to say judo sense because it's jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Every match starts standing.
Right.
So if I get a collar grip and I am trying to keep good posture, I'm rolling my shoulder blades back into my back pockets. I have good structure here with my frame on your collar. Maybe I do a back grip. Maybe I don't. Doesn't matter. I have a sleeve grip. And then your whole purpose is to get me out of this strong postured position.
That's right.
You want to get me down like this.
That's right.
I want to maintain this through active distance management with the collar grip. I want to pin that sleeve to your hip. And I'm just going to hold you and I'm going to have a good posture, right? Well, this static hold is exactly what those cable workouts are. Pushing out, not allowing this twisting motion.
It's called anti-rotation. Yeah. Yeah, dude. And
the more I've done it, I see the pathways of cable training.
You're making that stability happen yourself because you have to. You don't have your back against the wall. And being that anti-rotation thing is very underlooked. In other words, sometimes what I'll do is I'll stand with my, imagine me doing a double cable press, standing, trying to maintain an upright posture with a very minimal lean. That's hard, dude. When you got that weight pulling back on you, you can stagger your stance, like we would. We wouldn't just stand with our feet together grappling. We'd stagger our stance a little bit. But even with that, then think about this. So if I have two, think about dropping one of them and then trying to press the heavy weight with one arm. Guess what that's trying to do? It's trying to twist you too. And something like a pull-off press is even more where we're completely pushing that. But that anti-rotation is huge in grappling, especially from the standing position. And that's where people get rib injuries, some thoracic injuries when they don't have that kind of anti-rotation musculature built up. All those obliques and everything like that works on that. So that's another really good one to train.
I can see how, especially if you get to the point where you get a good base of muscle.
Yep.
So like you were saying, okay, you can lift a little bit of weight.
Yeah.
That from a grappler's perspective, in health longevity, you can be completely set without having a gym like me and you have, which is huge. Cables or bands, certain style, and kettlebells, a couple.
And a pull-up bar. Set. And a pull-up bar, I would argue.
And a pull-up bar.
Yeah.
Which you have, let's say, I would say 4 kettlebells. We're just building it out a little bit, because then you can do doubles on the same weight, but then you can have 2 different styles of weight, something maybe a little heavier, something a little lighter, some of your cable or bands, and a pull-up bar, and you'll get all your lower body from your kettlebells. You're going to get all your static stuff and your rotational and your core from kettlebell and bands. You're going to get really good body weight pull stuff from your upper body from your pull-up bar, and then you can get cardio from the kettlebells.
Well, no,
body weight.
Yeah, but there's a bunch of protocols out there for that. Here, I would say this: if you guys are looking to really have a good home gym that is as versatile as possible, you haven't been down here, Bill, since I replaced my rack with my functional trainer that actually has the weight racks and the pulleys and all that. That is and multi-directional pulleys, both. It is awesome. And that in my belt squat thing are probably one of the best purchases I've made, just for the versatility, man. It's really good. So anyway.
Yeah, and the belt squatter, I mean, I was using that for like traps and some shoulder stuff, and like, that thing's phenomenal too. That's a great point. If you want to build out a home gym, but you don't maybe have space for a rack, or you don't want to spend $1,000 on a rack, or and everything that comes with it.
Here, and I would argue this, man, and people are gonna just try to, everyone has their, lifting is. And I can tell you, it's like a religion in a lot of ways. Their way is the best way type of thing. But if you are not a power lifter, this is just my opinion for longevity. Loading that spine with huge amounts of weight on your back over time, it is precarious, because all it takes is a little shift. That's why I really have gotten, that's why I like doing things like kettlebell goblet squats, where you don't have that big moment arm on top of your shoulders, right? And the belt squat, all that weight's around my hips, right? So I would argue for grappling, it's easy to get caught up in looking, we did this for the longest time without beating this horse to death here today. But for the longest time, we thought all lifting was from muscle and fitness and bodybuilding, right? And it's like, well, if you're a bodybuilder, sure, you lift like that. Or if you're a power lifter, absolutely, that's your sport. But I think we've gotten like, well, that's how we lift. And people look at me like, why are you doing that? They're like, what do you mean? This is, it's almost like so that's why I really think the FRS guys are onto something and have been for a long time. It's just interesting. They're still they're making inroads into this stuff, but people still are looking at, well, I gotta do all these. I gotta bench press. I gotta, back squat. I gotta deadlift. Anyway.
Yeah. What's interesting is it's almost like you have the notes here. It says modify workouts for injuries. So if it's leg day and you have a hurt back, you can still get a great workout without loading your back and risking further injuries. It's literally. Well,
my question is why do you have a back injury? Okay. And that brings in the other thing about making sure this is another good point. And I've talked about people a lot with this a lot. I had, this was a patient of mine. years ago, and he was like, "Well, I was saying, hey, we need to get you into a good high quality physical therapist for your back." He's like, "Well, I don't need that. I do heavy, as in my work." I'm like, "Mm-hmm." Put him on the table face down and had him try to press bend his knee and try to press his heel and the dude had zero glute activation. I'm like, yeah, that's a problem, dude. In other words, we have these relative weaknesses, these muscle imbalances that you are not going to train out of with just strictly sagittal plane training. And we really need to identify what those weaknesses are. And guess what? Working on weaknesses suck. It's not fun, man. You want to train what you're good at. You'd get a lot more benefit out of training your weaknesses. Like for me, my hamstrings have been tight and very weak, quite honestly. And I've really been focusing on them. And that has made, move the needle more than anything, moving than something, oh, I'm good at this. Let me just keep doing this,
Yeah. And, so people know I'll maybe butcher it, but a doctor of osteopathic medicine.
Yeah.
Right. So you deal with a lot of, in your day-to-day patients, you're dealing with a lot of people that get hurt at work and stuff like that. And so you're probably seeing the average person when you do those kind of tests of, okay, let's see what your glute activate. Let's take away this professional athlete or professional grappler narrative. We're all just normal people that have that Jared does concrete and so does Lawrence and Andrew paints and manages people now because he's a bigwig, and I'm a photographer, and we have normal jobs,
right?
And so that's what you see on the daily. You're not dealing with like professional athletes. No. When you come into the gym, you're dealing with athletes, but you're dealing typically with a normal person, and a normal person, their activation of muscles is probably terrible.
Well, it's all of us. I'm not picking on anyone. Most of us sit on our butts, have these shortened, weak hip flexors, have absent glute activation, and wonder why we get back injuries all the time. It's crazy. And so,
and then we start to do some sort of athletic endeavor that is
how many guys
brutal.
How many guys in their 40s have pulled a hamstring while they're trying to do a pickup basketball game or soccer game, right?
They run across the grocery store parking lot to put the cart away, and they're like, oh, just blew out a wheel.
Well, that's called synergistic dominance, right? They have such poor glute activation. They're making their poor hamstrings as their primary hip extenders. Yeah, this is just one example of, And so not to mention that carries over into the hobbyist jiu-jitsu athlete that comes in with these issues and doesn't fix them. I would say these muscle imbalances, when I say imbalances, I mean relative weaknesses based on are one of the biggest contributors to injury.
Yeah. Would you recommend that someone finds a coach, a strength training coach?
Yeah.
Because actually, why don't you go ahead and answer that? Why?
Yeah. Well,
you say yes.
Well, like with any profession, there's a large variation on quality of trainers. Okay.
Sure.
That being said, I would look for someone that trains athletes. I think this is my own bias, but going to like one of the kettlebell folks, that's kind of they really get a lot of work in gluteal activation, the importance of that, mobility and strength. If I was to pick one, I would look for someone that really knows what they're doing with kettlebells, because they've gone through a different type of training than your average personal trainer. I've seen some just awful ones that don't know how to squat themselves, much less teach someone else how to squat.
And people will call themselves a personal trainer because they went to 24-hour fitness or EOS fitness.
Yeah,
they got hired. They did their 4-week training.
Yeah.
And now they're technically a personal trainer.
Yeah.
And I see what you're saying with a kettlebell instructor typically if they have all the appropriate certifications and stuff like that, which, not to say as Chris said in the beginning, not every trainer is good. Just like we've talked about world champion jiu-jitsu practitioners, that doesn't mean they're a good coach.
That's right.
Same thing. Whether that's doctors, photographers, anything. Mm-hmm. So, but I can see where because kettlebell training has more, maybe you'll strike me down on this, but almost has more injury potential for injury risk. What I mean is you're putting yourself out of the sagittal plane. There's a windmill movement has unorthodox, odd movements, which is why we're starting you with a shoe on your fist rather than an actual weight, because there is potential for injury if you do poor technique.
Turkish get up.
A Turkish get up. A good trainer in the kettlebell world is aware of the detriments of poor technique, which is why they can actually ultimately potentially be better, or there's a better pool of trainers.
Yeah, and I think those, and I'm kind of biased. I think Pavel's organization, Strong First, if you get a kettlebell trainer with that certification, they've earned that damn certification. Let me tell you, I went through it when it was the RKC back in 2010 or something like that, and it's you need to come in. They expect you to come in prepared. That's basically like, hey, let me see what you know. Let me look at your technique. I mean, it's 3 days of it's an examination. It's not like I'm going to go to I'm going to learn how to do this the first time at these things. It's right. A lot of, so that level, they really know how to, activate things properly. They know how to cue people. And I would argue that, like I said, I'm biased. I switched over to, a lot of the free weights I do is almost exclusively kettlebell. But for a variety of reasons, because you can do kind of the grinds, the clean and presses. For cardio, you can do snatch, lighter snatches for instance, crazy cardio. So anyway, yeah, if I was to look for someone to start with, it would be that, and then or maybe you find someone that is more eclectic too, than has, we know the kettlebell stuff, we also know this. I mean, you'll know by word of mouth who's good too.
Yeah, totally. Just to kind of go into like more of the jiu-jitsu training side, what would you say, how often should you train jiu-jitsu? Now, a little bit of an open-ended question where I think what needs to be evaluated before you even answer, and tell me what you think, is you probably need to identify who you are, which is like, what are you talking about, you fruity little man? Well, I'll tell you. I think you probably need to evaluate your age, your goals, and your fitness level. What are some things that, because I know you've heard this, new people coming in and saying, I mean, should I, like, is once a week enough? Is twice a week? Do I need to come every day? Like, what's enough? Like, how often should I train? I know I've gotten that question multiple times.
Okay, I have my own, as far as skill development and making progress. There are certain numbers that I think would be a good minimal 2 days a week. I think 3 days a week is a sweet spot. But then, like you said, it all goes back to allostatic load, aka the stress cup. I mean, are you 47 with 3 kids and a tough job? Are you a shift worker? That is going to alter the answer to that, of course. But I think if we just take all that aside, in my opinion, to start to make some forward progress, I think 2 days a week, in my opinion, do what you can do. It doesn't mean if, like, right now, because of life circumstances, you can only make it in 1 day a week. But if you do that, understand that it's going to be difficult to kind of put things together, right? 2 days a week, bare minimum. I think the sweet spot for me anyway is 3. If you're younger, you don't really have a lot of things going on, you recover real well, and you're big into it, you love it, you want to deep dive, you can look at 4 to 5 days a week. I can't handle 4 days a week.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say I definitely agree that 3 to 4 days. I think what also happens is you maintain a desire, the burnout thing, which I was told that, man, you're gonna burn. I was told so many times coming up, I'm gonna burn out, I'm gonna burn out, I'm gonna burn, as in not necessarily body, but mentally. Like I'm just gonna train too much, which I would say is probably for the most part gonna be true. That if someone trains as much as I was, especially in the I've tapered back a bit. Um, as much as I was doing 2-a-days and all that sort of thing, you're going to get to a point where you're going to run into that. You're going to have to dip into discipline and not just motivation, right? You have motivation to get better. You have motivation not to be the worst in the room. You have motivation to not get passed by the guys you train that you started with, right? Like there's that little bit of competition that like Glenn and I, we started like a couple months apart. So if he went to a class and I didn't, there's a motivation of like, oh, dang it, Glenn's going to get better than me, or he's going to learn something that I didn't, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You're going to have to start, that motivation goes away and you're going to have to be disciplined to keep going because you're not going to want to go. You're going to mentally be a little bit toasted where, and then it stops being fun. And then you get your blue belt and you stop going.
Well, and then you got to ask yourself, why have you lost motivation? Because remember, that's one of the signs of overtraining.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So just, no, absolutely. And, it's really important. If you are a professional jiu-jitsu, if that is your job and you're a professional athlete, that's your job, right? Most of us, that's not the case. And we were balancing other things. That's why we always talk about, I always bring it up, but I think that allostatic load is a good model to think about and to think about day to day, how you're feeling. And alter your, like I said I said that in that solo episode I just did, don't be afraid to alter your training that day, even if you had something else planned,
Yeah. Totally. So in you did a solo episode, you're talking about sandbaggers and all that kind of stuff. In my solo episode, I did not mention it, but I want to touch on it just real quick because I listened to your episode and I think you said a lot that was, I totally agree with. I thought I could maybe bring up a couple of examples that would maybe add to it. That one, because Chew Jiu-Jitsu came out with his own video because he's one of the guys that are getting called out for sandbag. Not that he's sandbagging, but one of his students are sandbagging. And they're like, why don't you promote him to brown belt? Because he just won purple belt worlds. His name's Brandon Reed. He's a, I think D2 or NIA or whatever the acronym is, wrestling champion. And then obviously, and he's Chewy's student, and he's a purple belt, and he just won worlds. He was at ADCC. He got completely destroyed by Felipe Pena. Okay, because some people are like, oh, he should be a brown belt, if not a black belt. Well, you see, the guy still needs development in the jiu-jitsu world. When he goes against elite level black belts, it's not the same.
Right.
And then obviously Michael Pixley, Helena Cravar were also some popular names that people are throwing out there. But we're talking about IBJJF. They have, and you mentioned this, they have a very specific age limitation and then time at belt limitation.
Right.
And I'd like to point out that Brandon Reed and Michael Pixley did not win worlds last year. They won this year. So in my opinion, that helps show that they're actually not far off. And I went back and watched their matches. They had some really tough matches. Yes, they dominated the guy that isn't a super athlete and isn't training or supplementing as much as they are. I don't mean supplementing like steroids. I mean like they're not living a pro athlete lifestyle like these guys are.
Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna dominate those guys. Is what it is. That's the world that we're in. We're not all dealt a deck of cards that are the same.
Right.
But the couple guys that they ran into towards the end of the bracket gave them really, really hard matches. And like I said before, they didn't even win the year before. Then also, I would like to point out someone, his name's Ed Ruth. Have you ever heard of this guy?
No.
Ed Ruth. He was on the world team for wrestling. He's retired from MMA. He was in Bellator. I mean, you're talking high level, 3-time national champ, I believe, D1. I can't remember if he wrestled at Penn State or where.
One of those great,
I guess a high level guy.
Yeah.
Right. All American. He won blue belt no gi worlds. He won blue belt gi worlds. He did not win purple belt no gi. So he has higher accolades than Pixley and Brandon Reed. Okay. And yes, a high-level wrestler can come in and do really well right out the gate, but it doesn't automatically mean they should be, let's say, a brown belt. It's not that they're not going to give every black belt and brown belt tough rounds, but I don't see it as sandbagging because there's proof out there of guys that come in with other martial arts backgrounds. And yes, they're going to thrash your everyday person of that belt level. But actually, I would say we also had, we saw this with Kolabate, with the Rotolo brothers. We saw it with even Tynan. Tynan lost to Jansen Gomez at brown belt, if I remember right. And then Kolabate, if I remember right, he lost as well on the come up. And it's like, there are other people of that level. It's just one of the things with IBJJF is, especially at the colored belts, anybody can do it.
Yeah.
So like, a Ty, he's one of our awesome blue belts, right? He's a newer blue belt, or he's been a blue belt for about a year now. Very good. He is a appliance mechanic, right? He works a day job. He doesn't train twice a day. He doesn't train every single day. He's quite good. He wins local tournaments. But he can go to Worlds and go against Kolabate, which has sponsors, supplements, anything that he's homeschooled. So he's able to spend all of his time, strength training, all this. And then on top of that, he's actually been training for 15 years because he went through all the juvenile belts,
Right.
By the time he was a blue belt, purple belt. So the sandbagging thing, I don't think, I think there's just going to always going to be anomalies, people that are above the rest that should probably spend the least amount of time that's required. Yes. At those belts. Like if Helena Cravar sits at purple belt for 3 years, that's kind of ridiculous, right? But I don't think she will. I think Danaher will promote her as needed.
Yeah.
So no, I just want to use some of those examples that people, in case they disagreed or something, or weren't aware that those two guys that you're talking about lost the year previously.
Well, a lot of people look at, people have this idea of fairness, and sometimes their analysis is superficial and they have a gut level reaction. I understand. But, like you said, you when you look into it a little further, kind of contextualize it with, hey, what was this rule set? What organization are they competing under? What do they require? I mean, there's a lot of these other variables here before you just start seeing a super high performer and say they're sandbagging.
Yeah.
I mean, there is sandbagging. Totally. Don't get me wrong. But,
and there's certain schools that are kind of known for it, where just like the example I said, where if Helena Cravar is a purple belt for the next 3 years, that's absolutely silly, right? Yeah. And there's some very prominent schools, which I love their content and I love watching them, that are kind of known for having a youth program in California that they're like, this guy's still at that level. Why? And that is what it is. So it absolutely exists. But I think when people see some of these examples of collegiate wrestlers specifically coming in and doing some big things, or they don't realize that like someone like Rotolos and Abate and Tynan, these guys literally have been training longer than your professor. Like by the time they're a purple belt,
for sure.
And they're just because of the nature of the landscape, they're going to go against someone that's been training for 5 years, 6 years.
That's right. And that's just that's
is
the
what
way
it is.
That's the way it is.
Yeah. And I know there's an odd conundrum because of my whole like spiel about like, I wish guys like Formiga and like Joao Miao and Paula Miao, these guys that are doing master like 3, but then they win every single year. Like they just dominate because they're basically a pro level grappler, like Hinger. They're still pros. They won't do adult anymore. They just destroy us fatties like me and get highlight reels.
Well,
so
speaking of that specifically, then we have also anomalies like Rafael Lovato Jr., who's coming to our academy next week for an instructionals, competing with adults at 40-something years old. Right. And so, I mean, that's amazing. And, that is something that's reverse sandbagging as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
Because he could
I don't really know what to call that.
Well, but he could very well be competing at his appropriate master's level.
And he does.
Yeah.
He won Master Worlds this year.
Yeah, but you get what I'm saying now.
Totally.
Yeah.
I like how the camera's like, you know what? Why don't you shut up and go blurry?
It's weird. Well, I wonder why it did that.
I love it. Well, maybe that's a sign that it's time for us to wrap up.
I think it is, or it might make my skin look better.
It definitely does. You actually look like Brad Pitt now.
Oh, thank you. With a little bit of blurring out.
Yeah.
Nice.
So why don't you hit that outro music?
I will, but I want to tease something real quick. I think in our next episode, I would like, because we're coming up on end of year promotions at our academy, I would like to kind of bring up this comes up every year about, hey, what do you guys think about criteria for promotions? There's been a lot of talk in the BJJ community on some of the little electronic magazines about, BJJ being watered down with, attendance-based promotions and, versus merit-based promotions. And I think that would be a topic I'd like to cover. And if you guys have some thoughts ahead of time, please send them in, because I think that's something is kind of topical right now.
Yeah, I love talking about the promotion stuff because a lot of people don't like to talk about promotions. So we can be the taboo ones.
It's controversial.
I love that.
Okay. Well, at any rate, you guys, send comments in, and we will see you here shortly.
Yeah, like, subscribe. See y'all.